For the supreme star Dominion, the planet Solus 3 had always been dismissed as an insignificant primitive world, a mere speck in the endless cosmos. When first encountering its inhabitants, the Empire's scouts and envoys scoffed at the planet's outdated ways, its dense forests, unpredictable climate, and untamed wilderness. To the Dominion's high command, it was little more than an obstacle, a minor inconvenience standing in their way. Convinced of their superiority, the Dominion's War Council swiftly approved an invasion, confident that their cutting-edge weaponry and mechanized legions would secure an easy victory. The campaign was expected to be nothing more than a brief display of their technological might, a skirmish to crush a backwater species still dependent on nature. Their generals laughed at the thought of resistance, poring over holographic projections of Solus 3's jungle-covered continents. "These ancient forests will be reduced to ash in a matter of days," one commander boasted, dismissing the terrain as an outdated relic that had no place in modern warfare. Their armies were equipped with hover tanks, plasma rifles, and advanced reconnaissance drones, all designed to cut through any resistance with brutal efficiency. To them, the jungle was not a fortress, it was an inconvenience. Yet, unbeknownst to them, Solus 3's defenders had long mastered the art of war in their own environment. Special forces had trained extensively in jungle warfare, learning to use the terrain to their advantage. They understood the subtle shifts in the earth beneath their feet, the dangers of sudden sinkholes, and the ways humidity could corrode even the most sophisticated equipment. Unlike the invaders, they knew that any force unfamiliar with the terrain would soon find itself lost, vulnerable, and exposed. While the Dominion's armies relied on sensors and drones, Solus 3's warriors relied on instinct, experience, and centuries of battle-hardened knowledge. To the outsiders, the jungle was an enemy. To the defenders, it was an ally. So when the Dominion's forces finally descended upon the dense forests, they did so with arrogance. Their war machines crashed through the undergrowth, their soldiers advancing with the certainty of conquerors, their drones scanning for heat signatures and movement. They believed they were hunting an inferior force, but the jungle was watching. The first attack struck without warning. A Dominion patrol wandered too far ahead, and suddenly, chaos erupted. Hidden snipers eliminated key officers in a matter of seconds. Explosives concealed beneath the brush detonated, scattering soldiers in all directions. Carefully placed traps sent invaders tumbling into unseen pits. Before they could react, shadows flickered between the trees, striking and vanishing into the green abyss. The Dominion's forces, so accustomed to controlling the battlefield, found themselves unable to adapt. Their sensors failed to penetrate the thick canopy. Their drones struggled to navigate through the dense humidity, their circuits malfunctioning. Soldiers trained for urban and desert combat found themselves sluggish, their armor heavy, their movements hindered by terrain that seemed to swallow them whole. The jungle had become their enemy, and it fought alongside Solus 3's warriors. The Supreme Dominion's High Command, observing from their orbiting warships, grew increasingly frustrated. This was supposed to be a simple conquest. Instead, their troops were being picked off one by one, their formations shattered before they could even identify their enemy. They had anticipated an open battlefield where their firepower could annihilate resistance in an instant. But instead, they found themselves trapped in a labyrinth of shifting foliage where every tree could conceal a threat, every shadow could be a soldier lying in wait. Desperation crept into their ranks. Their soldiers advanced blindly, their weapons firing into the unknown, hoping to hit an enemy they could not see. Their commanders barked orders through communication channels that crackled with static. Their confidence was beginning to erode. And then, the killing truly began. Solus 3's elite warriors struck with precision. They did not waste ammunition. They fired only when necessary. They did not reveal their positions. They moved like ghosts, unseen and unheard until it was too late. Every attack was calculated to spread fear and doubt. Explosions erupted in The darkness, disorienting the invaders, isolated squads, cut off from reinforcements, vanished into the wilderness, their fates unknown. The Dominion's forces were not just fighting an army, they were fighting the jungle itself. Panic spread. Some Dominion troops abandoned their weapons, attempting to flee back to extraction points. But their maps were useless. Their navigation systems, reliant on satellite guidance, had been jammed. The jungle had shifted. Paths that once seemed clear now twisted into impassable walls of foliage. Those who tried to retreat found themselves walking in circles, lost in an endless maze of green. The Dominion's War Council, watching helplessly from orbit, finally made their decision. Defeat was inevitable. What they had dismissed as a primitive world had proven to be their undoing. The order was given: retreat. But even retreating was a battle in itself. The jungle, which had swallowed their soldiers, refused to let them go so easily. As they attempted to pull back, their formations collapsed into further chaos. The warriors of Solus III pursued them relentlessly, striking from the trees, from the shadows, from the very ground they walked on. What had begun as an invasion ended as a rout. By the time the last of the Dominion's forces had evacuated, they had left behind thousands of their own, lost to the wilderness, claimed by a planet they had once thought weak, and Solus III stood victorious. The Dominion's once mighty soldiers, overcome by fear, abandoned their positions, running in any direction they thought might lead them to safety. But the jungle showed no mercy. Solus III's special forces struck with ruthless precision, selecting their targets with ease, fully aware of both the terrain and the enemy's fractured morale. What had begun as an orderly retreat quickly crumbled into chaos. Escape routes vanished as the dense foliage closed in, and scattered stragglers only added to the confusion. Terrified, Dominion soldiers discarded their weapons, equipment, and even wounded comrades in their desperate bid for survival. The proud, once arrogant commanders of the Dominion were now reduced to nothing more than prey, their high-tech ambitions buried beneath the unrelenting grasp of the jungle. The planet they had sought to conquer had instead become their graveyard. The very wilderness they had ridiculed had become their downfall. The elite troops of Solus III, whom they had dismissed as primitive, had not only outlasted them but had outmaneuvered them at every turn. In the end, only a small fraction of the invading force managed to escape. Those who survived the ordeal were forever scarred, physically and mentally. They carried back with them stories of a planet they had once deemed insignificant, a place where warriors had redefined the meaning of combat, endurance, and survival. The battle had proven a truth the Dominion had long ignored. Technology alone was not enough. Understanding the battlefield, adapting to its challenges, and possessing the sheer will to survive were far greater weapons than any advanced arsenal. As the last of the enemy ships left orbit, the jungle stood silent once more, as if untouched by war. Solus III's special forces, their mission complete, melted back into the wilderness without ceremony. There were no grand celebrations, no triumphant parades. This was simply another operation, another victory. But this time, they had done more than just defend their home. They had sent a message to the entire galaxy, one that would never be forgotten. The Dominion's once invincible war machine had been broken. Word of the humiliating defeat spread rapidly throughout their empire, shaking the very foundation of their belief in technological superiority. A planet they had once dismissed as unimportant had handed them a defeat unlike anything they had ever experienced. For the first time, the Dominion was forced to acknowledge a critical flaw in their war doctrine. Their vast fleets and cutting-edge weaponry had proven useless against an opponent who refused to fight on their terms. Their star maps, once symbols of their control over the galaxy, now revealed something they had never considered, a vulnerability they had failed to see. Meanwhile, the warriors of Solus III returned to their daily lives, unseen and uncelebrated. Their victory did not require public recognition. They knew the truth. They had defended their world against an enemy that saw itself as untouchable. While the jungle had aided them, it was their training, adaptability, and deep knowledge of combat that had sealed the Dominion's fate. The Dominion's leaders, humiliated and bewildered, struggled to understand how they had misjudged Solus III so disastrously. They had expected an effortless conquest, only to find themselves outmatched in ways they had never anticipated. Their initial confidence had been shattered, and the once overlooked planet now stood as a symbol of resilience and defiance. For, now, the Dominion would not return. But Solus III's leaders knew this peace was temporary. Their enemy would come back, stronger, smarter, and more prepared. And so, they too began to prepare. The Dominion may have retreated, but Solus III's warriors knew better than to celebrate too soon. The enemy was wounded, but not defeated. High above in the void of space, the remnants of the Dominion's fleet regrouped, their commanders analyzing every failure, every misstep. They would return, stronger, wiser, and vengeful. Back on Solus III, preparations had already begun. The special forces, their existence a secret to many, vanished into the wilderness once more, refining their techniques, improving their defenses, and preparing for the inevitable. The planet's leaders, now aware of the full extent of the threat, funneled resources into fortifying their world. Underground bunkers were expanded, new weaponry was developed, and resistance cells were formed in every major region. But it was not just Solus III that had changed. Across the galaxy, whispers of the Dominion's defeat spread like wildfire. Rebel factions, long oppressed under the Empire's rule, saw weakness where once there had been invincibility. Uprisings erupted on distant worlds. Resistance groups that had once fought in the shadows now moved openly, emboldened by the knowledge that the Dominion could be defeated. The Supreme Dominion, furious and humiliated, declared a full-scale campaign of retribution. They could not afford to let Solus III's eye of defiance go unpunished. For the first time in centuries, the Empire faced the unthinkable, a challenge to its absolute rule. And so, in the depths of space, the Dominion prepared for war. Months passed, then years. The skies above Solus III remained quiet, but its people knew that silence was temporary. Deep within the jungles, hidden from satellites and scanners, Earth's special forces trained tirelessly, honing their skills for the battle to come. Then, one fateful day, the sky burned. The Dominion had returned, but this time, they were not taking any chances. No more underestimating the enemy, no more reckless advances into the unknown. They arrived with overwhelming force, legions of warships, thousands of soldiers, and technology specifically designed to counter the conditions that had doomed them before. Their drones were now resistant to the jungle's interference, their armor modified for humid environments, their strategies rewritten to avoid the mistakes of the past. But Solus III was ready. As the first Dominion drop pods pierced the sky, the defenders activated countermeasures. False heat signatures lured enemy forces into dead zones. Camouflaged traps, far more advanced than before, awaited every patrol. The jungle, which had been their greatest weapon, had now been turned into something even deadlier, a living battlefield engineered for one purpose, to grind the Dominion's war machine into dust. The battle began again, but this time, it would not be a skirmish. It would be a war. And this time, Solus III was not just fighting for survival, it was fighting for the future of the galaxy.